Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on here on Watchbox Reviews. Everything you see here is for sale, and you will know the names, the references, as well as the pricing because it's all in the description below this video. Also, if you want to reach out for purchase and pricing questions, we have a new direct email line. It is tmosso@thewatchbox.com. From you to me and my crew, your questions about these watches right here and any you see on Watchbox Reviews. Let's jump straight into the deep end with an obvious crowd pleaser. This watch came out in 2013, but somehow, instead of starting big and then losing momentum like most new models, the watch known as the Rolex BLNR just accelerated. Now this, of course, is the, as of 2019, discontinued Oyster bracelet model that actually came out in 2013. For the first ever time on Rolex GMT, we had a partially blue bezel, a blue 24-hour hand, and a very different look, sometimes known as the Dark Knight, the black and blue, the BLNR, or the Batman. It's a watch that was striking because so little changed, but enough to punctuate the expression. It's basically an exclamation point for your wrist. Now throwing it on the wrist, this is still a 40mm super case GMT, so fundamentally, it's no different in fit than the watch that debuted back at Basel 2005. It's not terribly thick, at about 12.7 millimeters thick. It'll slide under a cuff, and you can really see across the wrist the hollow end links of past days are gone. So this one doesn't wear lug to lug, which would be about 48 millimeters. It's more like 51 millimeters across the wrist, but handsome, substantial. It does have the look of a larger watch, say 41 or 42 millimeters, and at 100 meters water resistant, it is very much an aquatic watch for swimming. Not so much for diving, but it is a very tough timepiece. One feature I like in particular is the ability of all of the GMT-Master 2s to temporarily display 3 time zones. The way you do that is you set the 24-hour hand to Greenwich Mean Time, and then you obviously have your local time set on the Mercedes hour, but you also use the bidirectional rotating GMT bezel, which has a ceramic insert, to display that third time zone. By offsetting from GMT as to the local port or airport of destination, you will be able to read 3 times on this dial. Now, of course, it also has the ability to quickly and easily set the local hour hand forward or backwards. Note how I'm rolling the date forward or backwards as I cross the international date line. A few notable refinements. Rolex uses its 904L steel, which it creates in its own foundry, I believe out in Plan-les-Ouates, I want to say, on the outskirts of Geneva. And so they create their bracelet, they create their case, they create their own alloys, and they even deposit platinum inside the ceramic bezel. So all of these numerals are actually platinum deposits inside the ceramic. The dial itself, white gold hands, white gold indices, and of course a black lacquer base. Very handsome, very appealing, and I must say timeless, because the first GMT from 1954 still looks recognizably related to that watch right there. And I could say the same about the first Rolex Le Mans, launched in 1963, a watch that would come to be known only months later as the Rolex Cosmograph Daytona. Now the model you see right here, of course, is latest spec 116500 LN, launched at Basel World 2016. Still a 40mm case, still the caliber 4130 3-day vertical clutch column wheel movement inside. It does feature 100-meter water resistance, and it also has the ceramic bezel. That was the real adjustment of specification for 2016. There's a white dial version, there's a black dial version. The white dial version seems to be more common. This has always been my favorite because visually the bezel expands the dial. You don't see an obvious border between the two, giving the watch the appearance of a larger timepiece on the wrist, even as it fits quite easily. It's about 47.5 millimeters lug to lug, and it's thinner than the GMT at about 12.2 millimeters thick, so you can really see how that one would slide underneath the cuff. This is a timepiece that is very much my style, and while I'm not normally a Rolex guy, I love motorsports, and I love the Motorsports Association of this watch. We're just about a week and a half away from the start of proceedings for the 24 Hours of Daytona, so you can have this one ready and on your wrist for the big race. Sports cars, of course, not NASCAR. A handsome piece. It features an Oyster bracelet like the GMT, and it features the same EasyLink system internal to the clasp. So you have that EasyLink that allows you to add or remove 5 millimeters of incremental adjustment. I'll demonstrate how that works. It's easier to see from the bottom. 5 millimeters in, 5 millimeters out. It's like adding or removing one sizable link. Now, speaking of full bracelet sports watches, I feel like we haven't had a modern Moonwatch on the table in quite a while, and If we're going to show a modern Moonwatch, and it's not the new 321, then it's going to be something along the lines of the Sapphire sandwich, because this is Watchbox Reviews, and we love movement. Specifically, we love the ability to see and appreciate movements. Now, what sets this watch apart from the standard Moonwatch isn't the dial, it isn't the size, the case, it isn't the fit. It is, in fact, the display case back with a little bit of a beautified and hot-rodded caliber 1863. It's based on the same La Manna 1873 Bausch as caliber 861, but here we have a more elaborately finished set of bridges and levers. The chronograph brake goes from Delrin, basically a polymer plastic, to metal here and satin finished, and of course you could see it. A distinction between the 1861 and 1863. Not only is this a better finished movement, but you can actually appreciate it. Mechanically, it is identical. There's no distinction between the two, but I'm going to show it one more time and try to get a better view from underneath the bracelet. This is a very special movement, as it's still what Omega equips on NASA flights into space, and it's what NASA fits to its astronauts for extravehicular activities, spacewalks, and it is a historically important movement that is still relevant because it's still in the game. 42 millimeters with solid end links, the watch stretches about 53 millimeters end link to end link across the wrist, and because it is called the Sapphire sandwich, you got one on the case back and you've got one on the dial side, so this is not the usual Moonwatch Hesselite plastic, so you can't easily scratch or scuff it. Throw it on the wrist. This must have been an enormous watch back in the mid-1960s. Today, it's pretty much par, 42 millimeters for a men's sports complication. And you will note that it's an easy watch to read, as even without a macro of the wrist, you can easily tell the time. Note that the chronograph seconds hand is also loomed, a feature every chronograph should have. Now, the timepiece, of course, broader because of the end links. You can see how it stretches across the wrist, but on my 16-centimeter wrist, I'm not approaching the limits here. Throw it on a strap, you could wear it on an even smaller wrist. So this is a watch that has a lot of baked-in versatility. The bracelet itself is a bit of a hybrid of a dress bracelet and a sports bracelet. You can see polished outers, satin flanks, polished intermediates, staggered link alignment, and a little bit of an ovoid cross-section, giving this one a look somewhere between a dress watch bracelet and a sports watch bracelet. Of course, a sports watch clasp, fully milled out. You can see this one, of course, unmarred, no refinishing. The marks are still deep and distinct, fully milled out with a matching swing arm and twin trigger deploying. It is a very solid clasp. Basically what you'd get on a Diver 300 meter, but without the dive extension. And speaking of the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter, the watch that came out in 2018, this was the 25th anniversary Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter, and a few things changed. Well, actually a lot changed. First, let's talk about what did not change. This is essentially the same design that bowed back in 1993, making this the longest running unmolested Seamaster design. Think of how many times Omega has rebooted the Seamaster line since the first 300 came out in 1957, the first Seamaster Diver. It never had the design continuity for which the Rolex Submariner is famous until this model family, I should say. Now, what changed here is we go from 41 millimeters with the old watch to 42 millimeters right here. The wave dial returns. It went away in 2012. Up till 2017, we had these lacquer dials. It came back for 2018, blue ceramic with a wave pattern, laser etched, and it is a ceramic dial, so it will not scratch, it will not tarnish, it will not oxidize or fade. Effectively, all the advantages and the beauty of enamel, but without the fragility and expense. You also have applique indices. Remember that original Bond 2531? Actually, I think the original Bond from GoldenEye was the 2541 quartz, but both of them featured printed features. They did not have applique indices as this one does. Now, you've got those Bond skeleton hands. You've got a bezel here that is a combination of yellow gold with a ceramic inlay, and then you've got a new helium escape valve shaped a little bit like a Reese's peanut butter cup. It's no longer a cylinder, it's now vaguely conical, and the change for 2018 was that you can now open it during a dive. Previously, not possible. The date moves from 3 o'clock down to 6 o'clock, and the movement, which now has a sapphire display case back, goes from the old 2500 base to the new 8800, which is a much tougher tri-level coaxial, 55-hour power reserve, master chronometer, silicon hairspring, anti-magnetic, 300 meters, all of that good stuff, and it still wears easily. 13.7 millimeters on the wrist. It's not the thinnest timepiece, but it is an easy one to wear, as 50 millimeters lug to lug means you're going to be able to wear this watch on a smaller wrist. Now, it is colorful, it It is handsome, and it is complementary to most attire. In spite of being a two-tone watch, it does not look antiquated. It doesn't feel like a 90s or 80s cliche. This is two-tone done right, the modern way. And in fact, I'm even going to call this a tritone with the blinding array of yellow, gold, silver, and blue. It's a very special look on the wrist, and a very accessible way to get into an haute de gamme style diving watch. When you're looking at something that's not, just another Seiko diver, maybe an Oris, you're looking at something that is Rolex, Breitling, Omega, or the mainstream big three. In my opinion, this is the best value and the most visually appealing. Now, speaking of the big three, there is an unofficial Rolex on the table today, and it's important to note just how much value you get from Rolex's cousin company, Tudor. Now, this is the Tudor Black Bay Steel. It's a model that came out at Baselworld 2017. Still 41 millimeters. What set this one apart, of course, is the two-tone look with the black and the silver, but also the presence of a date. So this is effectively the same movement you get in the Pelagos. So the MT5612, 70-hour power reserve, automatic, chronometer-certified, silicone hairspring, a feature that's still uncommon in Rolex divers. Now, this one, of course, on a strap is an interesting look, and I've always marveled that they pack a lot of different vintage cues into these watches. It's not an homage to any one watch, though overall you might say it's a little bit of a 1950s Rolex Tudor sub big crown look. At the same time as you have those cues, you also have the snowflake hands from the 1968 to 1975 Tudor subs, and then you also have two shields with the post-1968 shield on the dial, and then on the crown itself you have the pre-1968 Tudor Rose logo. So a very fascinating little tour of Tudor and Rolex history, but this one is also a bit more military inflected than a standard Black Bay because of the use of a textile strap. Now, this is not strictly speaking a NATO strap. It's a Tudor factory piece that's nicely made, and as you can see, it uses a conventional pin buckle, so you don't have to worry about the gooseneck crimping system that gets a little bit annoying in terms of thickness as well as fiddliness. For many folks, a standard pin buckle will do, and Tudor gives you wonderful hardware, as the individual minders are both satin and polished steel, and then the buckle itself features the Tudor Shield logo that is actually molded into, or I should say machined into, the buckle itself. A nice little touch, thoughtful attention to detail, and once again, you are getting a very substantial movement in this watch that has almost all of the technological capability you will find in Rolex, but it also includes the silicone element that's almost never found in a Rolex watch. So continuing our sports watch kick, we've got one that has impeccable pedigree and universal fit. This is probably the Nautilus we see least often on the show. The 5712, the Moonphase Power Reserve and Date. 40 millimeters in stainless steel. The watch is quite slender at 8.8 millimeters. It fits and it wears more like the 5711 than it does the 5726 annual calendar, and on the wrist you can tell the difference between a 5711 and a 5726. The 26 seems almost like an offshore version. If you can think of a Royal Oak becoming a Royal Oak offshore, that's how the annual calendar Nautilus feels compared to the 5711, whereas this has the same delicate and exquisitely crafted ultra-thin bracelet and an extraordinarily thin case that's only fractions of a millimeter thicker than a 5711, so eyes closed, this feels like the original. Now, the dial has that wonderful sunburst with gradient. You can see there is that striation from side to side that Genta envisioned back in 1976, but we also have that gradient from silver blue at the center to almost black navy at the edge. So it's got both going on, the gradient and the striations. You have a coaxial date and moonphase display down at what we're going to call 7 o'clock. There's a power reserve indicator. It has a 48-hour power reserve, and there's small seconds. What sets this one apart from the 5726 and the 5711 is that the movement inside is actually Patek's more premium automatic. You get the caliber 240, and the 240 is beautiful. First released in 77, it gives you that 22-karat micro rotor, which opens up the case back so you can appreciate the whole movement without being blocked by a rotor and a winding bridge. It also keeps everything thin. As you can see, the rotor is in the same plane as the other bridges, which allows the watch to be exceptionally slender. Now, with a screw-down crown and a 60-meter water resistance, it's not quite as tough as the standard 5711 or 26, but it's still a swimmable watch at 60 meters with a screw-down crown. It's also a very comfortable watch, and when I throw it on my wrist, again, eyes closed, this could be the 5711. In terms of its fit, its stack height on the wrist, and the feel of the bracelet, it is a more refined timepiece in every way. More compact, and I would even say more elegant. If you're looking for one that would be sort of foot in the two worlds of dress and sports watches, one foot in each world at the same time, straddling the fence. That's the 5712. And once again, I see so many of the other Nautilus models that this one even has an element of rarity among that exalted company. So having exhausted my sports watches, or almost exhausted my sports watches, I got a few more. Let's talk a little bit about dress watches. And in particular, sticking with our Patek theme for a moment, let's talk about what might be the most loved modern annual calendar. Now, this is the 5293, and it is a very special piece because it is essentially a watch that takes a sector dial, an annual calendar, a Calatrava case, and it puts them all together. A timepiece that is almost perfect in every regard. This was one of the launch models for this generation of Patek Philippe annual calendar back in 2005 at Baselworld when this model first came out. Now, a few things I like about this watch are the elements of differential finish on the dial and the use of the color blue, but not in the modern fashion of just choking you with it, but sparingly. You could see that the date, or I should say the date, the day, and the month discs are printed in blue. We have the handsome sector-style dial in blue. We have the incredible hands in leaf fashion in blue, and so this is a timepiece that gives you almost everything you would want from a gradient silver. As you can see, there are two different silvers on the dial, and it gives you that contrast that is subtle. It doesn't bang you over the head with any of the contrasts or the color differentials. It's just a beautiful watch in white gold that is all about grace. And yet at the same time, in a white metal, it is more discreet than, say, a yellow gold Calatrava 5227. Now this timepiece, easy to wear, comfortable, wonderfully flat, wonderfully broad, just a timepiece I can't get enough of, and yet I rarely see, as this is a discontinued model, and in a lot of regards, this is just a timepiece that is among the few Patek Philippe dress watches that people actively seek and snap up. So that timepiece right there, one of the all-timers, and I would say the only thing I've got on the table that would compare in terms of grandeur, albeit with much more help, than the 5396 would be this watch right here. Now, you like the 5396, but you're going to love the 3970p. This is a timepiece that is a little giant at 36 millimeters. It is a watch that has everything you want, everything you need, and nothing you don't. A timepiece at 36.2 millimeters in platinum that represents a 4th series version of this watch, and that means it has the full matching platinum clasp. It also has the baton-style hands, the dart-style indices, and unlike the 5396 with the annual calendar, this is a true perpetual calendar, as well as a chronograph. It's part of that continuity and family dating back to the original 1518 of 1941, the first Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronograph wristwatch. And being powered by the old La Magne base, it's also something of a dead art. Patek Philippe no longer improves a Bausch to create their own movements. This is the CH2770. Now, they changed a lot here. The basic stuff, compared to the standard movement, which has a 45 to 48 hour power reserve, this has a 65-hour power reserve. Compared to the standard, which has a mobile stud index, this is free sprung, Patek Philippe Gyromax. Compared to the standard movement, which features elemental finishing, rustic finishing, like what you'd find on a standard Omega movement. This one features Geneva hallmark, and whereas the standard movement would be unadjusted as delivered, this one is adjusted in 5 positions. And whereas the standard movement features a flat hairspring, this one features an overcoil. So that's another important distinction between the 5396, we're going to show you the movement of that because I didn't show you before, and the CH2770. First, note how beautiful the 3970's open manual caseback is. It's simply more beautiful, even if it's not quite as convenient it is a pleasure to wind this movement. You'll also note that this is a timepiece with a flat hairspring, and this timepiece features all the tricks, including the overcoil, which is made by hand, adding to the laborious process of finishing and executing the watch. This watch will feature a small element of machine finish, whereas everything you see here is entirely of manual finish. So the 5396 is a wonderful watch in so many ways, but if you want the ultra high-end, the true top shelf from Patek, you're probably going to be looking at one of the flagship complications. Throwing it on the wrist, this is a watch that wears easily, and it's perfect for anyone. This is a unisex option. This is an option for those who wish for discretion while wearing a $100,000 watch. This is an option for those who perhaps have a taste for the more traditional, whereas when you're talking about a watch that is 38mm plus, it does have a more insistent form and presence on the wrist. And I'm going to demonstrate that to good effect right here. But if you ask me which of the two do I want, while I love this watch for its value, its rarity, and its discontinued aura, nevertheless, this watch has all of that going for it. Plus, it is an all-timer. The annual calendar in Patek's catalog dates back to 1996 in the 5035. The Perpetual calendar chronograph dates back to World War II, and it is iconic of Patek. Now, I should also mention that if you want the chronograph without the additional complications, you wish for something a little bit warmer than a white metal, and you wish to wear a larger watch even than our 5396, well, this watch right here is going to give you that, because this is the 5170R, launched in 2016 in the variant you see here, built on the original 2010 39.4mm case. What this watch gives you is a broad, flat, exquisite, warm, and accessible presence on the wrist. It's a bit more charming, a bit more debonair. It is more self-consciously visible. It makes a statement in a way, say, a white metal would not, in the way a 36mm watch would not. But it is gloriously handsome and well keyed to Patek's own history. As you can see, the design of the dial using the classic applique and rather florid Breguet Arabic numerals that have always been reserved for Patek Philippe's flagship and statement watches. The dial is a matte black, so there's no reflective element there. And if you look, you can see that while the hands themselves are polished rose gold, the chronograph hands for seconds as well as minutes are a frosted rose gold for greater contrast. Now, this being a modern Patek caliber, you pull the crown out, it does hack the movement, so you've got that. You've also got a broader case back, and while I do love the original Le Mans 2310 Bausch that became the 2770, I also appreciate this CH29 535 PS as a watch that's designed for the size of its case. So it's properly sized. It has the long power reserve, the 28.8 beat rate. What you can see here is Patek Philippe seal level stuff, as this watch has only ever existed in the era of the Patek Philippe seal. And it is also a bigger, broader, and more visible movement, as it's easier to see into the mechanism than it is with the rather crowded and undersized CH2770. You can see that clutch exquisitely all jeweled, moving away from and into contact with the driving center wheel. And of course, you can see that when you reset with the hammers falling on the heart cams at center, there's a lot to see here. A wonderful watch, and again, this is the 2016 dial. This was the penultimate version of this watch before 2017's 5170p with the baguettes and the gradient dial. A lot of folks think that this was one of the high water marks of Patek chronographs in the previous decade, and I'm not going to argue the point, even as I'm a white metal watch guy. Now, speaking of white metals, the ultimate in daily driver durability is probably steel. Ceramic is more scratch resistant, but it can fracture or chip. Gold, of course, cannot fracture or chip, but it's more likely to scratch and scuff. Steel is the best all-around option. Steel or grade 5 titanium. And here we have a watch launched in late 2017, part of the Historique collection. This represents a nod to Vacheron's Unpast, the old reference 4240 of 1942, a watch with a LeCoultre triple calendar caliber inside, so not a triple calendar chronograph, but a triple calendar. The old LeCoultre movement here is replaced by a Vacheron in-house caliber. It's based on the 4400 family. So let's turn all that over, take a quick look. Geneva hallmark, manual wind, 65-hour power reserve, adjusted in 5 positions like a chronometer. It is beautifully executed with handsome stripes, satin finishing on all wheels. There's engine turning on the base plate, and there's even a lovely mirrored anglage that you could see glinting and gleaming along the edges of the bridges, as well well as in every jewel and screw sink. Now, there are no blued screws here because Vacheron polishes its screws. Absolutely nowhere for irregularities to hide, with every screw head black polished and their slots as well as circumference chamfered. Now, this watch is all about its case and its dial. As exquisite as the movement is, and it is a fine caliber, it's the claw-style lugs here and the triple Gadron case that hark back to the late Art Deco era of the early 1940s, 1942 being the inspiration period for this watch. That reference 4240 was still redolent of the ocean liner style era, even as the 1940s would segue into mid-century modernism and gradually give up a little bit of this Fritz Lang metropolis style aesthetic. Nevertheless, I like this watch. I like Art Deco. I love ocean liners, and this dial is spare for a Vacheron, but also incredibly handsome, with a champagne sunburst at center, and you can see that radial graining. Blued steel hands, you have the two apertures, and the day as well as the month disc are printed in blue. The date track outboard, you can see there's that little red varnished index that migrates around. It's a radial date. The date track itself is satin silver, and then there are blue printed numerals over the satin silver. Also note that the numerals are radially arrayed, so they turn on their side, then they turn upside down, then they turn on their side again before coming erect up at 31. The font that is used with exquisite serifs and that lovely open 9, truly special, redolent of its age. You can feel as though it's a little time machine for your wrist. Not in the sense that I use the term time machine to describe watches that show original condition, but it's a time machine in the sense that it takes you back. A truly special Vacheron, and in my opinion, one of the watches that proved in 2017 Vacheron was on the comeback trail by late in the year. Now, going back to, I want to say late 2004, early 2005, Lange offered this lovely rose gold variant of its 1999 Datograph flyback chronograph. 39 millimeters in rose gold. The watch features a silver galvanized dial that is itself made of sterling silver, so the dial is made of precious metal. The hands and the indices are made of gold. The case is made of gold, and of course the movement caliber L951 is, metaphorically speaking, solid gold. Now, on the dial side, a lot to love. You have a pusher adjuster for the outsized date, the panorama datum, and it's a pleasure to operate, almost as good as a fine column wheel chronograph, which, by the way, you can find right here. It has a crisp tick to it. It's also audible and distinct, and yet about halfway down, it almost feels as the pusher is being sucked into the column wheel. That's how refined it feels. It is, of course, a manual wind flyback chronograph, so you can reset and restart with the trigger down at 4 o'clock. It is also an instantaneous jumping minute, and if you look carefully, you can see it's even a loomed dial. Tachymeter scale outboard, so it's got a little bit of a sporty flair to it, and it has that caliber L9511. Now, I talk about manual wind movements being more beautiful than automatics, and again, I'm going to pick on the 5396 a little bit here, which has a dial to kill for, but with most of the movement obscured by a winding bridge and a rotor, you're not seeing all for which you've paid, at least not all in the same shot. You got to move that rotor around. Here, you have the satin-finished steel of the chronograph levers. You have the German silver, the nickel-copper-zinc alloy in that golden hue for the bridges and plates. You have the violet of the pivot jewels. You have the gold of the bridges and the wheels. You have the cobalt metallic blue of the fired blued screws. And you have the black polish on the swan's neck regulator, the case clamp screws, as well as the cap of the column wheel and all of the adjusting screws that are used to regulate the movement, both chronograph and timekeeping functions. Overcoil hairspring and a big 18K slow beating balance. Yes, you do have stop seconds. It's there if you want it. Column wheel lateral clutch. You could see, as with the Patek Philippe, you have a fully jeweled lateral clutch, but you also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 interior angles just on the lateral clutch. Those sharp inward angles, let me quickly see if I can show you. Andrew, try to get as close in focus. You could see that part of the clutch that has those acute angles, convergence of beveled surfaces, those are your interior angles. I have seen Geneva seal movements that do not include one interior angle. That's how good the dado is. And a lot of folks still prefer the original dado to the 2012 to present up-down. 39 millimeters is the right size, and the dial doesn't feel as crowded as it would come to feel with the power reserve indicator. So for a lot of folks, this is going to be the natural choice. If you want a purebred datograph, for a lot of folks, it's going to be the Generation 1 watch. Now here's a watch that debuted, I want to say back in 2012 in the form you see right here. This is the Saxonia Thin from a Lange und Sohne. If Lange can do complication, it can also do simplicity, and this watch has a lot to recommend it. 40 millimeters by 6 millimeters thick. What really sets it apart is the detailing of what is outwardly a rather simple dial. Now you have pinched and bright polished white gold alpha style hands at the center with a polished cap at their center. You have indices that are applique white gold, but also note that there is an applied white gold cabochon outboard of each one of these indices. Also, take note that the Lange und Sohne script is vaulted to trace the arc of the top of the dial, and then you have a lovely satin silver. No sunburst here, it's a very subtle frosted finish, and even the Made in Germany script down at 6 o'clock is arced to trace the dial. You also have inboard a satin finished inner bezel to create a handsome metallic contrast. This has a brushed finish, this has a satin finish, or what Patek would call opaline. Very slender on the wrist, 46 millimeters lug to lug, caliber L93 on the caseback, manual wind and rather minimal, but it packs a 3-day power reserve, and you'll note the double solar spiral on the crown wheel as well as the ratchet wheel above the barrel, and a handsome black polished pocket watch style swan's neck spring for the black polished click. So a very handsome German style movement with a full 3/4 bridge over the train as well as the barrel, and you'll note there are jewels set in screw fixed chaton from the barrel down to the escapement. That's another nod to the pocket watch era, when jewels would be set into their golden chaton, then fixed into the bridges using screws rather than pressed in. You'll also note, as with the Datograph, the freehand engraved half bridge. Throw this one on the wrist, and as you can see, it is incredibly flat. It's 2 millimeters thinner than a Royal Oak 15202 Jumbo Extra Thin. This is a fine timepiece of exquisite character and enduring appeal that will never look dated, wears well on any wrist, and as you can see, consummate, flush-fitting dress watch elegance sliding underneath any wrist whatsoever. Okay, we're going to up the ante here with a little bit more complication. From the least complex watch on the table to perhaps the most complex watch on the table. This is the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Grand Tradition a Tourbillon. 200 pieces in platinum for the 2011 model year. You'll note it reads chronometry down at 6 o'clock because it was a tribute to the 2009 Concours International Chronometry Champion held at the Loloc Museum of Horology, and it was the first chronometry trial in Switzerland since the 1972 Neuchâtel Observatory. So what we wound up with was a straight-up knockdown, drag-out test of absolute accuracy between 16 submissions, and ultimately many of them were simply unearthed 20th century chronometry calibers that had been built for observatory trials. JLC entered 2 production movements. One was the Gyro Tourbillon 2, which needs no introduction, and the other was the automatic winding caliber 978 in the standard steel Master Tourbillon. Well, that movement won the trial overall against one-trick pony chronometry calibers and against the Gyro Tourbillon. So, how accurate was the caliber 978? Well, it averaged 0.13 seconds per day gained of variation, and if averaged out to a year, 47.5 seconds gained per year in the test. The test, by the way, was 45 days, not the COSC standard 2 weeks. Now, this watch has a lot to recommend it. First, a more beautiful and finely detailed and more elegant case than that original sports watch cased Master Tourbillon. This watch is graceful on the wrist, though a 43, it is only 13 millimeters thick, so it sits low, and it's not broad across the wrist at just under 50 millimeters. It's also aesthetically superior, as it features a sunburst ruthenium-coated dial with white gold diamond-polished dart-style indices, and you could see the half-frosted Dauphine hands at center over the tourbillon carriage. It is a date, it is a tourbillon, it is automatic, it is a GMT, and I'm going to demonstrate the most exceptional refinement of this watch now by showing you what happens between the 15th of the month and the 16th. You would expect that the tourbillon carriage would be obscured because of the jump. After all, it is a radial date, but in the course of a single night, the date makes a full jump over the tourbillon. You can see there's a 24-hour dial that's set independently from local time up at 12 o'clock, and then you have a continuously rounded and black-polished bridge for the tourbillon carriage. The tourbillon carriage, which is made of titanium and weighs one quarter of a gram. It features a free-sprung architecture, 6-position adjustment, full hand finishing, and of course it also acts as the running seconds for the watch. Turn it all over. You have a spectacular 22-karat winding mass with both satin and a media blasted finish, and it is a tank-tough ceramic bearing, unidirectional winding sports watch base movement with a 48-hour power reserve. And despite the fact that this platinum beauty is a true dress complication, it's still 50 meters water resistant, which is unnecessary but a wonderful feather in its cap, as JLC is famous for over-engineering watches. On the wrist, easy again. Comfortable, elegant, graceful, and flat to fit underneath the cuff. A very special watch with a movement of such surpassing accuracy that it blew away movements delivered to LeCoultre in boxes designed exclusively to win that trial. Sticking with our tourbillon theme, let's talk about FP Journe. This is what's known as the Boutique Edition. Boutique Edition, black dial and a rose gold case, meaning you must buy it at an FP Journe boutique or espace. Now, it's a matte black dial and everything. The dial, the case, and the movement made in-house by FP Journe. Power reserve, 42 hours. You could see the seconds operate as scrolling seconds or sweep seconds when the watch is below 12 hours of power reserve. Now, as I wind the watch, you can see that that seconds hand goes into jumping seconds mode, deadbeat, seconde mort, as you could see on the dial, avec seconde mort. It is indeed a dead second. Now, 42 hours of power reserve, you may wonder, why does the power reserve indicate 0 when it's fully wound? Because it's inspired by marine chronometers, which had to be wound at regular intervals, generally 24 hours apart. So you would want to know when the chronometer was 24 hours removed from its last winding. Now here, we have an even more exquisitely detailed tourbillon than what we had on the JLC. Though not quite as accurate in practice, it's still quite fierce, thanks to the remontoir d'égalité, 6-position adjustment, and an overcoil hairspring made by hand. You can see there's a rounded half bridge and then a filigree-style wire tourbillon cage for the 1-minute tourbillon beating away at 21.6. Turn it all over, and just as the actual watch itself includes a rose gold case, the movement is also made of rose gold. And you can see that there is a remontoir d'égalité, a linear titanium spring, meting out 1-second bursts of power from the mainspring to the escapement. So no matter how heavily wound, or down to 12 hours of power remaining, how heavily discharged, you will find that the amplitude remains exactly the same, allowing it to be superbly accurate and isochronic. 40 millimeters, it's an easy watch to wear and very comfortable, being 48 millimeters lug-to-lug across the wrist and very slender. A handsome and special timepiece, an FP Journe with a sense of occasion, and a true statement watch without being ungodly huge. I like that timepiece because it's a little giant in the sense that no 48 millimeter Hublot or 44 millimeter AP is going to make a more powerful visual statement or pack a bigger punch than the class, the grace, the refinement, and the invention, the ingenuity of that FP Journe tourbillon. Now, speaking of ingenuity, F.A. Jones had a concept in mind, not so much for a style of watch or engineering, but for a production process. American patents being built into watches for sale to North America by Swiss watchmakers. That was his concept back in the 1860s, but the French-Swiss were not interested. He went east, and in the town of Schaffhausen, he found an eager and able workforce that was ready to build watches American style for the American market. An international watch company was born. Now, this watch is a hybrid of IWC's classic Portugueser, which originated in 1939, and the F.A. Jones era pocket watches. This watch came out in 2005, stainless steel, 43 millimeters. It was a series of 3,000. It was the Portugueser F.A. Jones. So the dial looks like an F.A. Jones pocket watch, and it features a lacquered 12-step enamel dial that is absolutely exquisite, glinting, gleaming, wet, bottomless, almost as though you could stick your finger into it like a can of wet paint. So it has a pocket watch dial in a Portugueser case, but with a pocket watch-inspired onion-style crown. Turn it all over, and you have a movement caliber 98290, and 98290 is a pocket watch movement based on the ancient IWC caliber 98 that saw service in the original Portuguesers in the 20th century. A manual wind, 46-hour power reserve. You can see once again those pocket watch features like the damascening across the bridges, the 1-inch long or 25 millimeter broad Jones arrow index regulator. You'll also note that there is the 3/4 style bridge. You have the enormous hacking lever that you can actually see as it comes into contact with the balance and retracts. It has the largest hacking lever I've ever seen. An overcoil hairspring adjusted in 5 positions like a chronometer, beating away at 18,000 vibrations per hour. Basically, a pocket watch for your wrist is the way to understand it. That 37 millimeter diameter movement is properly sized for the case, as IWC is a true manufacturer. This is a tribute to 2 eras of IWC, the Portugueser era of the 20th century to present, and the pocket watch era of F.P. Jones's day. A very special watch, and one of the IWC timepieces that I love most. I'm also going to shout out what is easily the coolest yellow gold watch I've had on the show in a long time. This is the 1999 250-piece limited edition Girard-Perregaux Scuderia Ferrari Foudroyante. It is both a Foudroyante lightning second and a coaxial pusher rattrapant split seconds chronograph. So you have both features underneath a dial that feels almost like an homage to a Monaco roulette table and the Patek Philippe 5070 at the same time. Leaf-style hands in yellow gold, applique, let me see if I can get the light to catch this better, applique yellow gold Arabic numerals. You have the azurage concentric guilloche on the sub-registers, and then a black lacquer base with the red highlights and a tachymeter scale outboard. The back, this was the anniversary, 70 years of Scuderia Ferrari. Why not 1947 to 1999? Because that's when Ferrari was founded. But Scuderia Ferrari, the racing team, existed since 1929. Enzo Ferrari, originally a private racing team proprietor. He was the original Works Alfa Romeo Grand Prix operator and general manager before he started his own company and thus raced his own cars. So this is a tribute to the race team first and foremost. It is an incredible machine, and 40 millimeters in diameter. It's not as big as you think. The split-second Foudroyante automatic chrono. Big, substantial, yes. Luxurious and refined, absolutely. Tons of personality, but not so huge that you couldn't wear it on a human-sized wrist. Remember, my wrist, 16 centimeters. A very, very, very special 1999 250-piece limited edition. Speaking of chronographs, let's talk about 2 chronographs from opposite ends of the style and utility spectrum, one of which was designed for a job, the other designed for absolute leisure. So, in my right hand, the Breitling Navitor B01, 43 millimeters, slide rule bezel, vertical clutch, column wheel, chronograph, chronometer, caliber B01 with display case back. This is an exceptionally refined machine paying homage to Breitling's classic pilot's chronograph, first launched in 1954 and designed for the American AOPA. That was, in its day, designed to be primary cockpit navigation instrument kit. And of course, on the wrist, it still looks imposing. This is a latest generation model made in 2018 with a glorious inverse panda dial. And of course, you have that lovely dished dial that comes with the sloped logarithmic scale calculator bezel. A very special piece. Then again, I have only ever in my life seen one of these. A watch that defies description and which was never cataloged by Omega, but always offered somewhat informally off the books. This is the DeVille Chronoscope Rattrapant Platinum Baguette Bezel. It has a double mother-of-pearl dial. You have a blue mother-of-pearl dial base, and then the registers are all recessed with a white mother-of-pearl floor, surrounded surrounded by a polished bezel. You can see there's a polished bezel surrounding all of that. There is a scalloped blue mother-of-pearl insert at center. You have a platinum case, 41.5 millimeters in diameter, and you have invisible set giant baguette-cut diamonds. You can see that there's an outer track and inner track, but there are no pincers holding them in place. And on the case back, you have a 52-hour power reserve, double column wheel, vertical clutch, Rolex Piguet, coaxial, free-sprung, 5-position adjusted, chronometer caliber, all of this 100 meters water resistant. It is a bonkers watch. It is incredibly heavy in platinum, and as a substantial watch, you get a lot of it. Now, it is a split-second chronograph, just like the Girard-Perregaux, but this is a watch that is designed exclusively for those who want to carry an absolute 5-alarm fire on their wrist. This is a watch meant to be seen. And before you go and have some jeweler on 47th Street throw diamonds all over your Franck Muller, consider this, because this thing is all factory. And if you're an Omega fan looking for something unlike anything else, or you're a fan of extravagant watches in a place like Dubai, the French Riviera, Monaco, the Monaco Grand Prix from the deck of your mega yacht, that is the watch for you. That said, if budget, if means, if the will and the nerve are no impediment to your collection, then this is the watch to get on the table today. The 2019 Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Openworked double balance frosted gold. This is 41 millimeters of manually chiseled white gold. Every surface has been hand finished. You can see even the intermediate plots have been satinized with a sandpaper-like Florentine hammered finish. This is not done by a machine or a blasting process. This is done laboriously, manually, and yet you don't lose the sharp break between the polished flank of the bezel and the hammered top. Likewise, take a look at the crown, the only crown I've seen on a Royal Oak that features full, high-polished flanks. The dial, well, the dial is one and the same as the caliber 3132, freehand skeletonized and then immaculately beveled inside and out. There are dozens of interior angles here, and not one, but 2 balances on 2 separate balance bridges. It's a free-sprung 180-degree out-of-sync balance scheme. So the balances double up. There is a balance wheel on each side of this watch to double the mass, to improve its resistance to shock-induced timing deviation. So by doubling the mass of the balance, you double the potential resistance to shock-induced timing deviation. Note the hairspring stud holder on that side compared to the hairspring stud holder on this side. They are 180 degrees out of alignment. So when you hold one in such a position that the watch gains time, the other hairspring will be inclined to lose. So like an overcoil, it allows for concentric beating and even timekeeping in any position. Entirely hand-finished. It's also a loomed watch and 50 meters water resistant with a screw-down crown, which means you can swim with this watch. It's visible at night. Again, if you've got the nerve and the budget, this could easily be your everyday watch with rose gold hands and indices and that exceptional DLC-coded set of bridges and plates on the dial side. This watch is exceptional. Guys, I cannot top that. Email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com, if you saw anything you like on this table, from the 5396 to that bonkers Royal Oak I just showed you, and everything in between. tmosso@thewatchbox.com for pricing and purchase inquiries. And of course, prices, when I have them, are always listed in the description below. Time out, Tim out, and thank you for logging on.